Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Fall.
Dr. Michael, how are you this morning? It's morning. It's well, I already know how you're doing, but for the audience,
for those of you listening, I'm hanging in. I'm kind of groggy and under the weather, but feeling spirits are high. Barry, how are you doing?
Spirits are high for me as well. I'm doing fine. Spirits are high. I'm excited. Part of my excitement is seeing you and knowing that we're going to have the chance to discuss Mark Fisher's 2013 blog, notorious controversial blog posts exiting the Vampire Castle today. So that's going to be the subject of our podcast today. I'm excited to talk about it. I take it you are too, Dr. Michael, since you agreed to it. And I'm ready to get into the subject or say a couple background things that will hopefully serve as a foundation for our discussion, unless you have something else you would like to add.
No, let's get started. I'm excited about talking about this.
Okay, then in which case, let me get to it. So just a quick word about Mark Fisher, and then I'm also going to hopefully provide a brief, emphasis on brief, sort of summary of the blog post. And maybe after that, I'll just say a word or two about what we're doing with Mark Fisher's blog post essay today. So first thing, Mark Fisher, who was he? Born of working class from Leicester, England, from working class conservative planets. Yes, planets. Parents. And educated, became a couple things, and these hats are important to mention. He was a writer, music critic, cultural theorist, and a Marxist, and a professor at University of London for several years until his untimely passing. It's also crucial is that he mainly made his name under his blogging, made his fame under his blogging name. He blogged as K-Punk. And K-Punk is a fitting moniker because Mark Fisher's cultural theory, his writing, and his Marxism was all sort of bound up in his music writing and his very heavy and profound and lifelong engagement with popular music. Especially, I think we would say British British post-punk, with grime, early grime music and electronic dance music. And so all these things were kind of intertwined in Mark Fisher's career. The music criticism, the cultural theory, and the philosophical Marxism. Then quickly, he's responsible for some terms that our listeners may be familiar with, even if they haven't read Mark Fisher. So he didn't invent the term hauntology, but Mark Fisher kind of furthered and pursued that idea and elaborated it in many ways. And a leading category of speculative fiction and speculative and criticism about speculative fiction has been done under the category of explorations of the weird. And his last work, what turned out to be his last work, was a consideration of the weird as a category in fiction and culture, in contemporary fiction and culture. And that is kind of if I may say, I don't mean this disparaging, but this is a growing, I was about to say a cottage industry, but let's just say it's a growing field in academic studies. So there's that. And then last thing, he is also known for a book of Marxist theory called the book that put him on the map was a 2009 book called Capitalist Realism. And this is a statement. Now, sometimes I've seen it attributed to Slavoj Žižek. Sometimes I've seen it attributed to Frederick Jameson, but it's also there in Mark Fisher. And Mark Fisher takes this argument and runs with it. And what's the argument? That it is harder to imagine the end of the world, or in fact, it's much easier, rather. It's much easier, especially in speculative fiction, especially in weird fiction, especially in our popular culture. It's become very easy to imagine the end of the planet, but it has become less easy, becomes increasingly more difficult to imagine a state of affairs post-capitalism. And the internet was, for Mark Fisher, a perfect example of that, right? It begins in the Silicon Valley dream of kind of a utopian social project, right? Along with the technological advance. And then increasingly, it's sort of dominated by capitalism. AI technology, people were talking about that in the 60s, but only talking about it in terms, or mainly talking about it in terms of a human-centered or a human-centric revolution, that it was going to redefine in positive ways the realm, the workplace. Contrast that, the difference between that 1960s dream of technology and even of AI technology, what they called artificial intelligence back in the day, and the depressing reality of 2026 when we think of these subjects, and the way in which all our discussion, I mean, if you can't get away from news of AI anywhere, especially in our circles, right, Michael? That they're talking about AI constantly. It's always done, and this is Fisher's point. This is another place where Fisher was prescient. All that discussion now, none of that discussion is territory, utopian territory. It's not a place where we imagine the Oscar Wilde thing, that
right.
a map of the territory that doesn't include utopia, doesn't deserve to exist. The fact that all our AI talk is generated is basically comes under the rubric of capitalist development and advanced financial marketing and profits, just the profit drive, that we can't separate these two discussions. That's what Fisher was talking about in capitalist realism. So that's another way in which was prescient. Do you have a comment on that? Now, I probably spent too much time on that, but I'm going to try to be brief with.
No, I think that's helpful though, because I think what you've done in that was, and again, I'm a little groggy today, so I appreciate you taking the reins. But I think that what you've done is you've really sort of separated the myth from the reality around, in this case, AI. But I think we're going to see, as the discussion takes root, that there's the same sort of discrepancy or space between myth and reality in terms of just the ideology around sort of the subject matter of the Vampire's Castle. And then I think our task is going to be to sort of merge the two. So I got nothing else to add. Good job.
Yeah, well, thank you. So let me see if I can do shorter work with a précis of the article, and then we won't linger too long on my précis. We'll correct my précis by going directly to the text and conversing about the text, and that will correct any of my. Hopefully, that will rectify any inaccuracies I may make, any inaccurate statements I may make in the following. But let me try. I tried to sum up the basic contours of the blog post / essay.
Yeah.
In about three or four statements. So the first one. He is using the time-bound aspect of this essay is that his main example of what I'm about to discuss, ironically enough, is Russell Brand, who now has a new life, not on left-wing Twitter, not on left-wing circles, but in right-wing circles, along with Tucker Carlson. So there's a lot to be said on the ways in which his example, the political contours have changed to almost make meaningless, or certainly to make quizzical. One would have to ask and answer a series of questions to make sense of what Russell Brand has to say about this. But more importantly, he uses Owen Jones and Russell Brand as examples in the British media sphere to pose this question. He wonders if it's possible for folks from working class origins, like Mark Fisher, to speak in the public sphere and still have authority. The paradox that he senses is that working class people have tremendous authority in the British media sphere, but only provided they're silent, provided they can be visible, they can be heard, they can be seen, but not heard. And they can't really express their opinions. What's the problem with expressing their opinions, according to Fisher? As soon as they do, their words are judged against the pride, this notion of working class authenticity that no verbal discourse can, Fisher implies, live up to. So the paradox is working class voices are clamored for, but they can't say anything of substance. The debate is framed by the powers that be.
Do you feel? Well, I do. I think it's interesting because you're right. They're powerful and accepted as symbolic representations. But the minute
right.
is this? I mean, I think the answer is an obvious yes, but this is a form of essentially social gate or like classist gatekeeping, right?
He definitely feels it is.
Part of the problem about speaking up is if you speak up, you now are a media presence, and that's not an acceptable space for the working class. You're supposed to be working, and so you become a contradiction the minute you speak up.
Yeah. That's it exactly. And so your question, yes, it's an obvious yes in answer to your question, but you added a crucial term that that Fisher is trying very hard to bring back on the table, and he feels it's been put off the table. You immediately went to class, and that's what Fisher thinks is the real structure enabling this repressive discourse. Okay, I'm just going to move on quickly so we can get to the text. Okay, point one. Point two, what's replaced class consciousness? What's replaced class awareness? According to Fisher, it is a, quote, crippling form of self-consciousness. We are, quote, here's the quote, we are, instead, our public discourse is, quote, crippled by self-consciousness. And self-consciousness and why are we, in his case, he's talking to fellow left Twitterers from 2012. Why are we self-conscious? Because what's replaced class consciousness, according to Fisher, is a new censoriousness where we're very quick to judge. And in fact, he implies that our politics, what gets us engaged in politics, now, this seems to be, I don't want to get too ahead of our reading and our discussion of the reading, but I think might as well bring up this point because I think this is one of the main points of the essay and the main prescient point of the essay. He is sensing that there's a new turn in politics. And the new turn in politics, trolls are going to be all. Because what's really energizing political commitment and what goes under the name of political commitment is just the desire to troll. It is just a desire to one up, to say, what the hell are you? How can you possibly say that and still be a X, Y, or Z? How can you say that and still say you're a Marxist, whatever? How can you say that? And that this has become the new, speaking of replacing class as a concept, Fisher is saying, well, there's an even more comprehensive transformation going on in our midst in 2012. And he thinks that in a way, political activism, political activity to core it seems to be replaced by gestures. Well, we would now call virtue signaling, but he actually has a really broad definition of virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is also kind of a kind of covert hostility.
Yeah.
You're waiting to find a target. That's your new mode of doing politics. You're waiting to find a target for you to
elevate yourself.
Yeah, and elevate yourself above. That's really important. Okay, last two things. So we are driven by the desire to excommunicate, where our hostility to others and ability to lash out, it's what motivates our entry and our continuing presence in the game of politics. That's a kind of summary of what I was trying to say earlier. And then last point, Troll set the terms. And I think I was already alluding to that he's worried that what's happening is that this hostile faction is setting the terms for all political discussion. And the first casualty for that is class awareness. Okay. I said I would say very briefly, and I will keep this part of it brief. What's our interest in this essay blog? Critical media studies. There's a lot of stuff in here. It's short. There's a lot of stuff in here. This essay has a tangled place. It has a very complex history in Marxist circles, in Marxist academic circles, in media circles. Fisher has a controversial career. And I'll just mention the controversial career, both before, but especially after this. And I'll mention the elephant in the room. Only to say that Michael and I are not going to go anywhere near the elephant in the room, but I think I have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that a couple of years after this essay, he was roundly pilloried for this essay. I want to read, Michael and I found our copy of the essay from, I think, the Internet Archive. And they don't publish everything. This was originally published in, what was it, Michael? Do you remember? Northern Star.
Yeah.
Northern Star blog. And we don't have all of the posted comments, but I have some of them, and I want to read some of them. I'll censor them for our YouTube listeners. I don't know how censorious YouTube is now. Can I say the D word or the P word, Michael?
I think let it rip, Barry.
Let it rip? Okay, let's do it. In the interest of capitalist realism, let's do it. So here are the first 4 comments that are on the posted along with the original posting of Exiting the Vampire Castle. First comment, you're a dick. Second comment, you're a dick. P.S. Intersectional feminist vampires are under your bed. Next one, because of going on the blogger, going on the vampire trope. I suppose I'm supposed to read this in a Bela Lugosi kind of voice. I'm going to drown you, Mark Fisher, in a bar of peace. So a lot of hostility here. Now, one of the controversies, Mark Fisher killed himself about 4 years after this. Is this the reason why the controversy over this essay? Is it the reason he killed himself? Nobody kills himself for a single reason. Was it a contributor? I don't know. I mentioned this just to say there's a tangled history here that if our readers, listeners rather, are interested in, there's a lot more under the surface going on here. If you're interested in media culture, online left media culture, you want to reacquaint yourself or acquaint yourself with this bit of history. But we're not going to talk about it, any of this. What we're really going to talk about, and I think our interest now as we dive into the text, Michael, you and I are going to talk about whether or not Mark's words from 2012 have resonance. We're going to, in a way, after all this talk about contextualization, we're going to do a nice hat trick. And we're going to absent this from any context, right?
Right.
Because I think what we're interested in doing today is thinking about, we're conscious of the span of time, right? Over 10 years, right? Over a decade later, we're revisiting Inside the Vampire's Castle. And we're wondering whether or not this snapshot of online culture and Fisher's criticisms of this particular moment in online culture, are his criticisms relevant today or not? Kind of the simple question of just thinking of the criticism, detaching it from its particular context and debate, and thinking about what travels with us into the future. Are we ready to talk about our first quote?
Indeed, we
Or
shall.
do you have a comment? Or do you
No,
have a
no, no.
comment?
Let's get started.
Let's do it. So where to go from here? And this is in the section before, in the section called Inside the Vampire's Castle. Fisher enumerates 5 laws, or will enumerate 5 laws of the Vampire Castle, and he enumerates these laws, which Michael and I will discuss, in order to, he hopes, to put some distance between himself and ourselves, and to help us escape the Vampire Castle. So the purpose of talking about the laws of the Vampire Castle is to get us to think outside of the box of the Vampire Castle, or think outside the Vampire Castle's precincts. And so we're about to talk about that, but here's his sort of summation after he summarizes the problem and right before he transitions into his laws of the Vampire Castle. He writes this, and I'd like to have Michael, if you could, comment on it.
Mm.
Where to go to from here? It is first of all necessary to identify the features of the discourses and the desires which have led us to this grim, demoralizing past, which he has been describing, which I've tried to describe, where class has disappeared, but moralism is everywhere. Where solidarity, that's important. I mean, that's really what I was talking about when I said the trolls. He's worried that the trolls, even though he doesn't use that word. I wish I had done this. I wish I had looked up what's the first usage of troll. I don't think he uses that in here. I assume that's a more recent coinage, but I may be wrong on that. But anyway.
I don't know.
Where class has disappeared, but moralism is everywhere. Where solidarity is impossible. That's because of the trolls.
Mm-hmm.
Where solidarity is impossible, but guilt and fear are omnipresent. And not because we are terrorized. He's, like I said, he's one of his third sentence in the essay is left-wing Twitter can often be a miserable, dispiriting zone. So he's talking about left-wing online discourse. But moralism is everywhere, where solidarity is impossible, but guilt and fear are omnipresent. And not because we are terrorized by the right, but because we, left-wing Twitter, have allowed bourgeois modes of subjectivity to contaminate our movement. I think there are 2 libidinal discursive configurations. Let me unpack libidinal discursive, because I think there's that might be off-putting to non-theory speakers in our audience, but I think the thought behind libidinal discursive is really easy to understand, despite its origins in Lacan. That basically our speech, our language, is tied to our psychic drives,
Mm-hmm.
including anger, desire, lust, ego, things like that. That's an important way, and I think a very basic and that shouldn't just be the province of theory. This idea that our discourses, our formal discourses and our informal discourses, are motivated by our primal desires for identity making or for securing our existence, both symbolically and literally. That's, I think, a valuable mental tool. Anyway, I think there are 2 libidinal discursive configurations which have brought this situation about. They called themselves left-wing, but as the Brand episode has made clear, there are many ways assigned that the left, defined as an agent in a class struggle, has all but disappeared. Do you have a comment before we go to his description of the vampire's castle?
Let's talk about the castle and then come back, because I think that adds, even though we're trying to decontextualize here to a degree, I think it grounds his argument a bit. So let's go a little further. No, I do have thoughts though.
The first configuration is what I came to call the vampire's castle. The vampire's castle specializes in propagating guilt. It is driven by a priest's desire to excommunicate and condemn, an academic pedant's desire to be the first to be seen to spot a mistake. I hadn't realized this before, but the italics, this is like kind of a troika of bad things that are existing within the single vampire.
Right.
It's the priest's desire, the academic pedant's desire to be the first to be seen to spot a mistake, and a hipster's desire to be one of the in crowd. The danger in attacking the vampire's castle is that it can look as if, and it will do everything it can to reinforce the thought, that one is also attacking the struggles against racism, sexism, heterosexism. But far from being the only legitimate expression of anti-racism, sexism, heterosexism, the vampire's castle is best understood as a bourgeois liberal perversion and appropriation of the energy of these movements. So one of the things that keeps you in the vampire's castle is the vampire's castle is already always telling you that if you attack us as a vampire, you're attacking your own brothers. You're killing the solidarity you have with the only people who agree with you in your struggle against racism, sexism, heterosexism.
Right. Despite the fact that it is inherently cannibalistic and opportunistic, right? Yeah, I think that I have several. And I want to start because this is really framed as an academic discourse. I think that what he's talking about is a certain discomfort. And I'm going to give an example of what I'm talking about and then sort of try and unpack it a little bit. As I read this reminds me, his explanation of the the castle, right? This is a structure inherently built on some confluence of ego and uncertainty and fear. And it reminds me in a way of a graduate classroom where you have a student. I'm about to partake in it, right? Wow. I'm about to be a part of it. Where you have a student who is unsure of their standing and feels the need to participate, but is at the same time incredibly wary of saying something that can be attacked, shut down, or labeled as wrong. So the easy target, right, is this virtue signaling. You look for a moment that is morally based as opposed to historical or factual in some way. And you condemn something as being, racist, sexist, homophobic, some moral transgression against the sort of stated ideals, right? And you are now an active participant in a very safe place. The problem is the only way that you can do this is to attack your own. And I'm not going to say that it's a cheap shot, but it's not a substantial argument again that moves people forward. Yeah. So I think about the first paragraph that you read before this, where he says, and I think this is a good way of explaining, that's a good starting point moving back, right? Moralism is everywhere. Solidarity is impossible. Guilt and fear are omnipresent. So I think the logical question that comes out of my example, like, okay, if we're going to frame this as a graduate classroom, right? I only say that because that's an incredibly uncertain, fragile population. This is not meant to in any way disparage graduate students. It's an unsure time, right? Because it's different.
Because it's a transitional time. It's been structured so
it is, and you're
in a liminal space.
Yeah, and you're thrown into the pool with people who are far ahead of you most of the time. So it's very difficult. So that's not a criticism against it, but that's just the way that it works sometimes. But I think about this. So let's get out of the hypothetical classroom and sort of move it into Twitter, right? Because that's where this takes place. I think this is interesting. If you look at sort of left Twitter and right Twitter, I forget where I read this, and it was a couple years ago, but there was a discussion about why the left was just getting smoked by the right. Like, why was it that they were getting demolished? And the argument was that the right is organized. The right has a much simpler, much more inclusive platform or base to work from, whereas the left is just besieged by the need or the obligation or the felt obligation to represent everybody. And so if you look at that situation, the right eats the left's lunch because it's a unified voice. It's much harder to assail the right in this way because you can't assail an individual. You're assailing a mass, and that doesn't affect this or impact the same kind of, or create the same kind of damage, right? So if you look at this, you've got a bunch of mini factions on the left, all arguing for authenticity, all arguing for credibility, all sort of saddled with the
Yeah.
same sort of problem that we talked about earlier with the middle class. Like, well, how you're a fantastic spokesperson as long as you're silent. But the minute you speak, you now become a climber, and that's antithetical to the cause. So what are you doing?
What are you doing?
What
are you doing getting all this attention to yourself? We want you in here. We need to include you as a working class voice. We need
but
to
you can't climb.
Discussion. But yeah. Don't excel. We're setting the terms of your acceleration.
Right. And again,
excellence.
there's that element of gatekeeping there. But it also, if the working class starts to excel, we have to shift all our targets again. And if we have to shift all our targets again,
and that's troublesome. Yeah.
It's too much recalibration. And that makes everybody sound lazy, but it's not lazy. When you're fighting for your survival and when your identity is tied up in a lot of moving targets that are all constantly under attack, you end up sort of desperate in this regard. So I think this idea to excommunicate, to condemn, it's really just looking for the easiest targets that you have, because it's a question of survival. And it's a question, and again, I think it comes into this question of authenticity. If the working class is great so long as they don't speak, well, who gets to speak and still be working class? Well, obviously you have to have some sort of, moral high ground to do that. And so the only way to do that is to constantly reinforce it by attacking the same people that you should be working with.
Great. Thank you for that comment. And your example is spot on. And it makes me, if I may, want to revise one of the terms that I use to sort of set up this discussion. I was talking about Fisher's prescience in anticipating the triumph of the troll. But your example of the graduate classroom makes me want to moderate or slightly amend that observation, because what you described, and I think you're right in saying this. I mean, maybe I have a monolithic idea of the troll, but my sense of the troll, or that trolling, happens largely because people don't have anything at stake in the discourse. So they can be haters 24/7. Whereas I think what Fisher is talking about is really the academy shades all of this, right? He's a professor. And even though he's gesturing outside of the academy and he's concerned about publics broader than the academy, you're right to say that academic culture everywhere shapes his reaction, his response, his description of this phenomenon. And the key thing there is not the massive independence and autonomy of the troll that I'm ascribing to the troll. Like I said, maybe I'm doing an injustice to trolls, but I think that part of the joy of being a troll is that you can go in. It's kind of, part of the joy of being a hacker. Go in, mess things up, get away, and leave untouched, right? Nobody's going to punch you.
No.
Because you trolled. If they can't find you. But I think really what he's describing is what you're describing, a situation where he's describing behavior from people who are insecure, struggling to find their voice. I mean, that's the pathos of the situation. What you remind me of, and I think what Mark was very aware of, is that there's a kind of pathos here. He's not, I think, now people didn't think this, but I think, if I can intrude my position, I think that he's very sad and melancholy in describing the situation. I don't think he found any pleasure in describing the situation. And I think one of the reasons that this isn't a joyous essay, that he isn't joyfully unmasking the vampire's cast or revealing the vampires, is that he realizes that a lot of the people have great intentions. There's a pathos in that people feel insecure and they have to position themselves or else they're going to get squished.
Yes.
They feel, whether or not it's true, they feel that their intellectual and physical survival depends on how well they can perform. So if they have a bone that they can use to hit you with, then they're going to take it. And it's hard to fault them for that, with that desire.
No, I agree 100%. I think that this is certainly not a celebratory piece. I think that he's sort of just, if anything, I kind of read it as a process of coming to grips with the reality. Like this is what
Yeah,
it
well put.
is.
Well
And,
put.
it still holds today. And I want to make clear, by the way, I don't think this is just a graduate classroom
No,
phenomenon.
no,
I
no,
think that,
no. But I'd say your example made me
yeah,
modify my description.
yeah,
Well, Michael, with your help, we've gotten inside the vampire's castle. We talked a little
yeah.
bit about what the castle metaphor means to Fisher. And I think we've also started talking about the ways in which the denizens of the castle interact with each other and how the castle functions in our mind. So we talk a lot about context, and we haven't really allowed ourselves much time, mainly because I blab, to talk about the five laws that we promised to talk about. And they need some unpacking and some commentary, and they're certainly worth it. So, how about we have a second episode on Mr. Fisher's blog essay and talk about the laws and respond to the laws and think about how they're prescient and maybe think about the ways in which they're constricting. Maybe these are bad descriptions. We don't want to make this as simply we're not trying to make this a pro Fisher or a rehabilitate Fisher episode. We really are trying to think about these words and apply them to our context. So maybe we can do that when we think about his laws for next time.
Indeed. Honestly, I think that the alternative to that is to rush through them too quickly. So yeah, we'll,
Okay.
in
So
keeping with recent history, Barry, let's have a part two.
keeping with recent history, we'll do that. Fun as always, and rewarding and enlightening. I now have a different. I'll tell you one thing I'll do in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whenever we're. No, it's 2 weeks. That in the next week before we record next, I'm going to find out more about trolls. I realized that I don't know when the word really entered our parlance. And I'm curious to see whether or not there's a unified definition of trolls, or a
That's
trolling behavior has like their varying online behaviors that get described, put situated under that rubric. I'm wondering, have I simplified the troll? Is there a more complex understanding of the troll out there and available? I'll see if I can bring that to
We're
our
going to add
episode.
some depth. See if you can
We're
figure out how
gonna,
much depth we have to the troll. All right. Well, Barry, thank you very much, and we'll
thank
we'll
you,
pick this
Michael.
up again.
Thank you, Michael. Take care.